Hello and welcome again to another episode of One Starfish, where our mission is to help change the world one starfish or one person at a time. As always, make sure to rate, review, subscribe, share. That's how we get the word out, all that good stuff. Thank you guys for doing all of that stuff too. I'm excited for our guest today, Eric. Eric and I just met. He's actually in California. He's been in the coaching industry, started about 20 years ago, started his own business 7 years ago, helped a couple books out that look awesome. We'll make sure that information is definitely in the show notes if you want to check out the books and get them. But thank you so much for being on, Eric. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's go back because we talked a little bit before. Let's go back to 20 years ago that got you into, I guess, the coaching space, personal development, that kind of thing. What was there a catalyst that got you into that 20 years ago, or just kind of like you've always been in it? Or tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. There were probably a few catalysts. The first catalyst was in my early 20s, I think having my own personal crisis. I was finished up with my undergrad, trying to figure out what was next. Am I going to go to grad school? What am I going to do for work? What's my career path? And so I was, working in a variety of different companies, doing odds and ends jobs, just trying to figure out what was next. And I had kind of my own personal kind of crisis where I was kind of taking stock of my life up to that point and realizing, my gosh, I feel bankrupt. I feel emotionally bankrupt. I'd gone through some tough stuff with our family, my family of origins. I felt in terms of my friendships bankrupt. I had literally gone to 5 different universities over a 4-year period, if you can imagine that. And a career that I thought was going to pan out in sports was not panning out. And I was looking at my dating relationships, and everything was just kind of like, man, my life is really messy. And it was probably the first time where I was starting to actually ask the question, maybe the problem isn't with everybody else around me. Maybe there's something wrong with me, which in and of itself can be a very dark pit that you can find yourself in. And I certainly am thankful I did not go into a kind of self-loathing, self-condemning season, but really more learning the importance of introspection, self-reflection, paying attention to what was going on inside of me for the first time in my life. That coincides with getting married shortly after that, and realizing after the first 2 or 3 years of marriage that my wife was becoming kind of a shell of the woman that I had fallen in love with. And again, another moment of like, is it her fault, or do I actually have something to do with this? And in my immaturity. And then the third big moment was a mentor that I had referred to earlier. I started working for this gentleman, and he just point blank challenged me. He said, Eric, you have so much potential, but you are your own worst enemy. You get in your own way more than anything else. And your tendency to blame and project responsibility onto others is killing you. And that direct challenge kind of opened the door, I would say, into kind of looking back over my life. At that point, I was, late 20s, now early 30s, and able to recognize that, wow, there's so much more I wanted to be able to do, but not knowing how to get from where I was at that point to where I wanted to be as a person, as a leader, as a husband, as a father, as a friend, as a, whatever areas of life. And somehow internally, I knew that if I couldn't unlock more of my own potential, then I would plateau, which is what I often felt during that time. And so this mentor, I basically committed myself to a number of years of studying and learning under his leadership and allowing him to challenge me in a lot of different areas of my attitude, my behaviors. And that really kind of opened the door. And that happened, by the way, he just happened to be building a coaching company. I didn't get into it for the coaching. I got into it because I wanted to learn from him how he had learned to unlock his potential. But through that process, both learned very important, significant core principles and practices that have enabled me to unlock my potential. These are the things that I have been sharing now for many years with other leaders. And it just so happens that I learned that in the space of coaching and fell in love with coaching. And the two just kind of went hand in hand. Like, I love personal development, developed a high value for it. I was also really enjoying partnering with other leaders and empowering them, helping them to learn the secrets of how to unlock their own potential. And so I've just stayed in that space now for, like you said, about 20 years.
That's awesome. Well, let's get into some tangible stuff without giving away all the secrets of the books. Tell us a little bit about the books and what are some of those, maybe a couple of the secrets that you've really found that are really impactful for unlocking potential? Because I think anyone listening to this definitely wants their potential unlocked.
Absolutely. I think that's what we all have in common as people. So the first book, Leadership Gravitas, the subtitle is 12 Essential Skills to Expand Your Impact and Influence. We all have impact and influence in various areas of our life. That's how I define leadership, whether it's in our home, in our friendship group, at work, at the Starbucks counter. We influence other people. The question is not whether we have influence. The question is whether the people around us are benefiting from our influence. In other words, are we operating as an asset in any environment, or are we operating as a liability? And so what this book reveals is one of our core tools called the EQ Matrix, which is really kind of laying out for us to be emotionally intelligent people and leaders. What are the specific skills? And I'm thankful they're skills. I don't think these are innate abilities, but what are the essential skills that if I could practice and grow and develop in would actually allow me to put the best version of myself in the driver's seat more often? So that's that first book, and it provides this framework that gives us a vision of the people that we want to be, that will unlock more and more of our potential. But also for teams and organizations, it provides a map of what do we want to be as an organization, as a culture, so that we can all continue unlocking our potential. The second book, Transform Your Trajectory. It's subtitled How to Turn Your Most Challenging Moments into Life-Changing Breakthroughs. This introduces the second core tool in our toolkit. And it basically just empowers people to understand and practice the importance of what I call, watching your own game tape, right? So professional athletes spend a lot of time rewatching practices and games because when you're in the heat of the battle, you're so reactive. You're just trying to make do in that moment. But the importance of after the fact, reflecting back on our experiences and learning how to excavate the learning, the insights, the wisdom about ourselves, about our environment, and then to be able to disrupt, to learn how to actually disrupt these old patterns of thinking and behavior that are unhelpful so that we can unlock new attitudes and behaviors that will release more of our potential.
So what are some of those 12 things in the first book that, what's like one of them to give a little bit of an idea of what people will get when they get the books? What's one of them that really helps unlock like leadership potential?
Yeah, really simple. Like where we start in that first book is recognizing that all of us as human beings, like as we're going through our days, we're triggered. We're having these moments, these experiences that are impacting us mentally, emotionally, physically. We're being disrupted a lot of times. And when we're disrupted, what happens is we find, ourselves operating with attitudes and behaviors that are unhelpful. So first and foremost, just teaching people the simple practice of identifying when we're triggered, what happens to us? What are the indicators like the the needles on the dashboard of your car that are blinking in our face saying, hey, hold on, you've been disrupted. You're frustrated. You're feeling impatient. You're feeling anxious or stressed. You feel stuck. You feel uncertain. Whatever those things that disrupt us, being able to identify that we are disrupted and to be able to disrupt the kind of typical default pathways we would go on, whether it's becoming aggressive or passive aggressive in those environments, and being able to instead learn how to, in those moments, ideally, choose the attitudes and behaviors that we would love to move forward with. So it's literally, how do you identify when you're triggered? We usually have to practice it, right? So we realize after the fact that we've been triggered, to learn to identify the indicators that we've been disrupted. And then the simple skill set of how do you disrupt that default pathway and actually choose a pathway that's more preferable in that moment.
That's good. I like that. And then the other book, tell us a little bit of like something out of it that's just I don't know, something that's really out of it, that's a tangible thing that people can work toward their trajectory.
Yeah, so we mentioned these 12 skills of emotional intelligence. Which is, by the way, emotional intelligence is about so much more than just, emotional regulation. I think that's a good starting point. But we talk about the incredible importance of practicing self-awareness, right? So we use this iceberg imagery to remind people that 90% of what's going on in our life is really what's happening internally for us. But we spend 90% of our time, energy, and resource engaged in the 10% of what's going on outside of us. And so reminding people that, hey, if you want to take back control of your life, if you want to release more of your potential, then you've got to spend more time dealing with yourself, paying attention to yourself. So we start in what we call the self-awareness quadrant. We talk about the 3 core skills of practicing honesty. And we unpack what does it mean for us to practice on it? Why as adults is it still difficult for us to be brutally honest with ourselves, what's going on for us, how we're impacting our environment? We talk about the importance of humility, about learning to accept that today I have gold and I have dirt, and that's what I have to bring to the table. I don't have what I wish I had. I don't have what other people wish I had, but learning to accept and embrace who we are today, to make peace with that, and then to practice what I call playing your cards and letting the chips fall where they may. Like really bringing the full authentic version of you, knowing that sometimes you're going to bring gold and it's going to be a winning hand. Sometimes you're going to bring dirt. And yet exposing the dirt just gives us an opportunity to dig for more gold in those moments, right? That relates to personal development and growth. And then the third skill is self-love. In working with leaders over many years in every industry, what I find is very often people really struggle to either practice forgiving themselves for past indiscretions, failures, struggles, inadequacies. And we also struggle to forgive others. And unforgiveness in the form of unforgiveness toward ourselves or unforgiveness toward others, without even realizing it, I think it becomes a toxic thing inside of us that actually, I think, begins to undermine our ability to move forward with confidence. And so self-love is not this, I just tell myself
I went to get my nails done.
Yeah, which, by the way, could be a part of self-love. Or I would call that self-care. Yes. But I think self-love is really about setting ourselves free from the debts that we either hold ourselves in because of our past failures or hold other people in, which then disallows us from being able to move forward in helpful ways.
That's good. So, you've gone through some of this stuff. What's been some of the switches that have come? You mentioned that you got married and then your wife kind of like went into a shell of a person. You started really digging into, we attract who we are, not what we want. And so, I love that you started into that. Something I always say and tell people, how did it start to shift for you as you became self-aware and started to work on some of these things? Tell us a little bit about your results.
Yeah. The biggest shift really was that when I was confronted with some situation, circumstance, a conversation with my spouse, a situation with my kids where I felt frustrated, angry, disrupted, I was triggered. Mm-hmm. Recognizing in those moments that actually I'm the one responsible for my attitudes and behaviors. And so in any given moment, what I was doing was I was making myself a victim of my circumstances, blaming people around me for why things weren't working out for me. And that is, in some ways, holding on to a victim or a villain mindset or, projecting response. Sometimes it makes us feel a little powerful, but it's actually very disempowering, because what it does is it robs us of our personal agency, that actually we are the only ones who get to choose the attitudes and behaviors that we operate with, that only we can choose how we respond in any given moment. Only we can choose our mood. Only we can choose, what we contribute to any situation. And I think as I started practicing that, both the awareness of what would I normally do in this situation, and then beginning to reprogram or rewrite my programming with new attitudes and behaviors, and realized, wow, this is actually putting me back in the driver's seat. This is actually giving me control again over my own life experience, and allows me to contribute something so much healthier, so much more effective, so much more life-giving within my marriage and any other context that I was operating in. So it was really a slow, deliberate shift that I tell people is small steps, but over time leads to really radical change. So that today, my ability, obviously I still get triggered, I still get hijacked at times, but my ability to recover, what we call our recovery rate, to recover from those hijackings is far greater than it was before. Where maybe before my wife and I would have gone days, maybe even weeks, in some tussle and frustration, and I would just be seething and feeding off of the narrative that she doesn't understand me, she's wrong, she's being difficult. And now much more quickly am I able to recover and say, okay, hey, you know what? She's operating this way. This is how I'm feeling about it, but I get to choose the attitude, the mood, the way that I engage with her. And so those weeks or days now have turned into hours and minutes of recovery time.
That's good. It's always good when they go faster. As you went through some of that journey, I'm curious, how did associations play a role in in your development? And were there people, as you grew from one kind of person to another kind of person, that you? Because I hear people, like, I don't want to cut people out of my life, all that kind of stuff. Were there people that were like that, and how would you describe it if there were?
Yes. I think when I look back over my journey so far, I can see that in many different seasons, I'm really grateful that there were some people in my life that were incredibly supportive, affirming, encouraging, patient, gracious with me in my own developmental journey. And I think we all have to remember that we don't get to grow in a vacuum, right? Like, our growth is happening in real time in the midst of all of our relationships. And so those people really are the kind of bystanders of our own growth journey, right? And so they get the best and the worst of us. And we should be thankful for those people who stick with us. I also think, like you said, in different seasons, I would learn to recognize, hey, these people aren't committed to this lifestyle. Right. So these were people who were happy with life and content, which in some ways is really good. But they were, in my mind, settling for, hey, this is what life has given me. This is what my life is going to be about. And because I have such a deep passion to continually release fresh expressions of my own personal potential, I have discovered that being around people that are like-minded is really, really important. Because if I'm not, then I can find myself starting to settle for, well, I've grown a lot. I've done a lot of hard work. I guess I can take it easy now. I don't have to do that anymore. So yes, associations through all those seasons. And I would always say this, I have always worked really hard to make sure that I have people in my life that are further down the road than me in whatever area that I'm wanting to grow in, so that I can be inspired and learn from them. And I tell people there are always people that are further down the road than we are.
That's right. That's awesome, guys. So if you're listening to this, audit your associations. It's not about like cutting people out of your life, but it's about protecting your energy and being around people that are on the like-minded journey and growth. Because if you're not growing, you are dying. And so if they aren't growing, they are dying. Even if they're, quote, content, they're just dying. We don't want you to die. So if you're listening to this, keep growing. We want you to keep growing. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've overcome over the last, let's say 7 years, 20 years, whatever, 7 years when you start your own business? And how did you overcome them, mentally and or activity wise? Like on days you didn't feel like getting up, if there weren't any days like that, how did you keep going on those kind of days?
Oof. Wow, there have been so many. I'm trying to think of maybe one or two that would be helpful. I think I'll share one. When I started this coaching business, I started it with a couple of other partners, and we were all relatively good friends, and we were excited to build something together. And I think in the first few years, like so many young entrepreneurs, and we have this noble vision of building something with our friends, and we're all going to enjoy this. And then what I've learned from lawyers and from other mentors is, gosh, Eric, that all sounds great, but when money gets involved, people change. And so, I went through a very painful, difficult, turbulent year a couple of years ago, where both of these other partners were becoming increasingly frustrated with how I was running the company. And where there was a lack of alignment, we were trying to wrestle through how do we get on the same page. But at the end of the day, I also understood that as the leader of the organization, as the one who was responsible for the vision and where the company was going and how it was being built, I also knew that, like, at some point I've kind of got to fight for my core convictions of the kind of organization that I want to build. And so a lot of very difficult conversations that ultimately led to both of them deciding, hey, we don't want to be a part of this anymore. You can buy us out, and we're going to transition out. And I think that was a massive learning experience. One that, yes, it sounds great. Well, I remember a lawyer telling me, Eric, this is what I deal with every single day. Friends and family members who start companies together, and then as soon as money's involved, everyone gets a little crazy. Secondly, as a leader, having to wrestle through how important is it for me to stick to certain core convictions of how I want to operate and build this business, and where is there room to compromise and to find some common ground. And sometimes you can find common ground, and sometimes you realize, hey, we just have fundamentally different perspectives on this. And as a leader, what's the cost of sticking to your guns? And when do you know that that's the right thing to do? And again, I'm so grateful for mentors in my life who I was able to process all this through, and were able to give me guidance and encourage me to kind of hold my line at moments where I probably, out of fear and insecurity for losing those relationships, might have, compromised unhealthily. And then I think, thirdly, for the first time in my life, I experienced some significant anxiety attacks. I tell people the work of entrepreneurialism is an incredibly lonely endeavor, right? Because nobody else in your space fully, unless they're entrepreneur in their own endeavor, really fully can understand and appreciate the weight, the emotional, mental, even physical weight that you have to carry when you're trying to pioneer something. And so I went through kind of my own, mental health crisis, and ended up jumping into some therapy, and really leaning into my closest core friendship group during that time, and having to work through days where I would wake up and just feel like there was a 10-ton elephant sitting on my chest, and having to show up. What I tell people all the time is, as a leader, we can't just take 6 months off and say, well, I'm going to go deal with this mental health crisis. I mean, I still have clients. I've got to wake up every day, show up to the office, jump on Zoom calls, coach people, desperately try to give them the best of what I have, knowing that I'm running thin right now, knowing that I'm in my own whirlwind of circumstance, and learning to both be able to lead well and execute in terms of building the business and fulfilling my responsibilities, while at the same time doing the hard work on myself through therapy, through a lot of self-reflection, journaling, taking some different times away to be able to process what's going on and make sense of it, and recognizing things in me that needed to grow and needed to develop, right? It wasn't just my business partners. It wasn't just their fault. There were areas in me that I was able to recognize, wow, I'm operating out of some insecurity or fear or hostility or whatever was going on. So simultaneously running a business, leading, showing up, whilst at the same time doing the hard work to unlock more of my own potential. I tell people that's really, I think, the greatest challenge of leadership.
That's good. I love it. Well, guys, in wrapping up, always have 3 final questions, and then anything we didn't touch on that you think would be really impactful for our listeners. And as always, like I said, Eric's information will all be in the show notes. Reach out to him for any questions. Check out his books, all of that kind of good stuff. First and final question is, if someone is looking for their purpose, what's one sentence you would say that could help them find it?
Read Simon Sinek's Start with the Why. I think it's just a great resource and framework for helping people wrestle with that question.
I'll agree. Yeah, that's awesome. Second one is, what's a favorite quote and why?
Anything worth doing is worth doing poorly until you get better.
Good. I like that. And third and final question is, what's one word or sentence you want on your gravestone?
Here lies someone who gave everything to give the best of himself to the world around him.
I love it. All right. You run into someone in the coffee shop. They're like, awesome, Eric, I'm going to get the books. I'm going to learn about like the 12 steps and, building trajectory and all this stuff. What's something we didn't touch on, though, that you think would be really impactful for our listeners?
Yeah, I think it's just really helpful for leaders. And remember, I define leaders as anybody who has significant influence and impact in the world around them with other people. I think it's just remembering that for every one of us, leadership is a lonely journey. And leadership is not something that most of us, if not any of us, have really focused on through our years of education. Most people can't tell me a leadership class they took through middle school or high school or even in their college or graduate studies. And yet we're all expected to lead effectively in different areas of our life. And so, we shouldn't get so down on ourselves. We should recognize, hey, number one, I haven't really been trained for this, and that's okay. And number two, it's never too late to start. And number three, you know what? Don't do it alone. There are people who want to partner with them. That's what our coaching business does. There's other coaching businesses to say, hey, you know what? You're not bad for feeling like you're struggling in your leadership. Welcome to the party. And there are lots of great resources out there to help people make that journey.
That's awesome. Guys, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being out there. Let's go out there. Let's change the world one starfish or one person at a time. If we can change one life at a time together, we can change the world. Thanks so much for being on, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.